messengers, creatures of the great danger of worshiping other than Allah. There is none greater.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of Allah, our Creator, the Creator of the universe and of everything that's in it, I greet you all, my dear audience, in our Islamic way. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah's peace, mercy, and blessings be with you all. In the previous episode, we were discussing testimonies to the divine nature of the glorious Qur'an, aspects of this noble book that can testify to its divine nature. And we stopped at the scientific precision of the glorious Qur'an as a living testimony to the people of our time, people of this era of scientific and technological developments unparalleled in the human history, is the most suitable language of the people of our time, using the scientific precision of the glorious Qur'an to testify to its divine nature. This was the seventh facet of the precision of the glorious Qur'an, and the eighth is the historic precision of the glorious Qur'an. And again, I would like to emphasize the fact that the glorious Qur'an is not a book of history. It is a book of guidance to man in areas that cannot be correctly addressed by man, such as the area of faith, the area of acts of worship, the area of the moral code, and the area of the code of transactions with others. These four basic areas cannot be correctly addressed by man, and hence the need for religion. Besides this message of the Quran, we find many notions of the cosmos, of the universe, 1,200 verses that speak about various parts of the universe and its phenomena and its components. And we find also many notions about historic events. When the Quran speaks about Adam and Eve, may Allah be pleased with them both, history knows nothing about them. And that's why many of the unbelievers negate the story of Adam and Eve. When the Quran speaks about Noah, may Allah be pleased with him, many unbelievers negated the story of Noah. And they negated the event of the flood, although the fact that the Ark of Noah was discovered in 1948 on the slopes of Mount Judi in the southern part of Turkey, and the flood was with fresh water, as the Quran has said, due to water springs as well as rain. When the Quran speaks about Prophet Hud, may Allah be pleased with him, and the people of Ad, history knows nothing about them. And actually the Old Testament does not recognize either Hud, may Allah be pleased with him, or Saleh, may Allah be pleased with him. They jump from Noah, may Allah be pleased with him, to Abraham, may Allah be pleased with them both. And that's why all archaeological and historical discoveries have testified to the historic precision of the glorious Quran. And this historic precision is enough to testify to every sane person that the Quran cannot be the work of man. It's the divine word in its divine purity. The mere discovery of the Ark of Noah on the slopes of Mount Judi in the southern part of Turkey is a unique testimony to the divine nature of the glorious Quran. This is simply because the Old Testament has been persistently, up until this moment, speaking about the Ark of Noah landed on Mount Ararat. And as we mentioned in the previous episode, Mount Ararat is a volcanic mountain that erupted several times in human history. And if the Ark was actually preserved on Mount Ararat, it would have been burned completely. The Quran says, قِيلَ يَا أَرْضُ ابْلَعِي مَاءَكِ وَيَا سَمَاءُ أَقْلِعِي وَغِيضَ الْمَاءِ وَقُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ وَاسْتَوَتْ عَلَى الْجُودِيِّ وَقِيلَ بُعْدًا لِلْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. The Quran clearly emphasizes the fact that the Ark of Noah landed on Mount Al-Judi. The area between Mount Ararat and Mount Al-Judi is more than 200 miles. And Two areas are separated by a huge lake called Lake Van or Lake Wan. And of course, the two terrains are completely different. Mount Ararat is a completely volcanic terrain. Mount Judy is a completely sedimentary terrain. And the Quran emphasizes the fact that the ark will be definitely discovered. It says, وَلَقَدْ تَرَكْنَاهَا آيَةً فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. This means that we have left the Ark of Noah as one of the signs that can testify to the historic precision of the glorious Quran. Isn't this enough for people who like to reflect or remember or recall the discovery of the city of Iram in Ar-Rub al-Khali, in the empty quarter? And this was the main city of the people of Ad. And as I said, the Old Testament does not recognize Hud, may Allah be pleased with him, or Salih, may Allah be pleased with him. They don't recall them at all. And actually the people of Ad and the people of Salih were thousands of years before the coming of Muhammad, peace be upon him. Who would have told him about the people of Ad and how they reacted with their own prophet, Hud, may Allah be pleased with him, or about the people of Salih, the people of Thamud, and how they react to the prophet Salih. These are historic notions in the glorious Quran that can be a living testimony to the historic precision of this noble book. Many of the historic events narrated in the Quran have been proved by archaeological and historic discoveries that can clearly testify to the fact that this book cannot be the work of man. And actually, most of these notions in the Old Testament are completely off the point, are completely wrong. And that's why nobody can claim, as many of the Orientalists claim today, that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has quoted these historic narrations in the Quran from the Old Testament. Actually, any careful analysis can prove that the recent translations of the Old Testament have quoted the Quran rather than the other way around. The Quran did not take from the Old Testament. Translators of the Old Testament have copied the Quran on many occasions, as we shall inshallah detail in a special topic about historic precision of the glorious Quran. The ninth evidence is what I call the educational precision of the glorious Quran. The Quran is not a book of education, but it has got some indications how to educate your own younger generation. How can you educate your own pupils? How can you educate your own children? And of course, the Quran invites for the production of the noble human being, not the successful citizen. See, all current educational curricula invite for the production of a successful citizen. Success may not necessarily be established on the basis of right behavior. You can find many crooks who can be successful, many aggressors that can be successful, many cheaters who can be successful. And of course, to claim for a successful citizen actually implies nationalistic feelings and racial discrimination between people. The Quran invites for al-insan as-salih, the proper human being, as outlined in the glorious Quran, implies someone who knows his message in life precisely. And as we mentioned before, the message is bifold: being a good vicegerent on earth, a constructive element on earth, and being a good worshipper to your Creator, without parallels, partners, or similars. So all the educational indications in the glorious Quran are far superior to any educational system man has tried to impose. The 10th facet that can testify to the divine nature of the glorious Quran is the psychological indications of this noble book. The Quran addresses the human self in the way that can exalt that self to higher levels in the scale of Allah, and these levels can never be reached by any human ideas about psychology or psychological medicine, it can never be reached because the Quran invites human beings to be good worshippers to their Creator and to observe that Allah is overwatching them every second of their existence on the surface of that planet, in the midst of the nights, or the darkest of the nights, or under the brightest of the days. Allah is watching you, is recording every word you utter, every action you take, every penny you earn, every penny you spend. And this sense of observing Allah, or glory be to Him, or feeling that Allah is observing over you, is the most control over human behavior. Otherwise, man tends to cheat, to deceive, tends to lie, tends to be corrupted. And that's why the psychological address in the glorious Quran is far, far better than any psychological advice in the area of human psychology or psychological medicine. The 11th facet that can testify to the nobility and the divinity of the or divine nature of the glorious Quran is the economic precision in the glorious Quran. And we can see this in many of the Quranic legislations, such as alms giving, the laws of inheritance, forbidding dealing with usury, and the rest. And inshallah, we'll come to a short break and we'll continue this topic after this break. And until we meet, I leave you in Allah's peace, wishing you the best and greeting you in our Islamic way. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Back to you from this short break. I greet you, my dear audience, again in our Islamic way. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We were just discussing the economic precision in the glorious Quran, and we mentioned that many legislations in the glorious Quran can testify to the economic precision of that noble book, such as the legislation of alms giving, the laws of inheritance as detailed in the glorious Quran, forbidding usury with all its facets and faces, the divine instruction to write down loans and write down your recommendation for your inheritors before you pass away, and have witnesses to testify to the correctness of this advice. And we know that the many economic crises through which our world has passed many times, especially since 2008, many of the non-Muslim scholars in the area of economics to declare clearly that the main cause of these economic crises is dealing in usury, either directly or indirectly. And they advise that the only way out of this last economic crisis is to go back to the Islamic system of economics. And many of the scholars in the area of economics have written books and articles advising the world to go back to the Islamic legislation in the area of economic dealings, because this is the only way out of many of the economic crises the world has passed through. And they clearly admit that neither communism, nor socialism, nor capitalism, nor democracy did help man to develop a proper, just economic system. And we call this the economic precision of the glorious Quran. The facet number 12 that testifies to the divine nature of the glorious Quran is in the area of administration. We call it the administrative precision of the glorious Quran. Although the book is not a book of administration, but yet we find many administrative guidances in this noble book, and using the best expertise in the area, well distribution of specializations in any organization, justice between all the employees, respect of the elders, mercy to the youngsters, preservation of the rights of all the individuals in any society, in any community, in any organization, equality between all people, forbidding involving your own personal whims or likings that can actually harm the organization in one way or the other, preservation of general interest of the establishment, honesty in dealing with every matter in this organization. And actually, in many of the books that have been published in the West about administration, and they have excelled in that area, actually use Islamic principles. They never went away from what has been taught in the glorious Qur'an, and that's why we consider this particular facet, the administrative precision in the glorious Qur'an, a testimony to the divine nature of that book. Thirdly, we speak about the miraculous nature of addressing the domain of the unseen in the glorious Qur'an. And we can see this actually in the existence of the angels. Many unbelievers of our time do not believe in angels. But of course, it's a basic foundation of the Islamic belief to believe in Allah, in His angels, in His prophets and messengers, in His books, the last hour, and in the life to come, and in all the other unknowns which the Quran has detailed and which non-believers cannot say a word about them. They only negate all that without any proof. Fourthly, we have the sound precision in the glorious Quran. Of course, we can see one aspect of the beauty of the Quran is the rhythm of the verses, which we can see in a chapter like Ar-Rahman. We can see the beauty of the rhythm that cannot be copied by man in any human writings. Fifthly, we have the influential aspect of the glorious Quran. Many people have embraced Islam simply by listening to the Quran being recited. And many of those were non-Arabs. They could not even understand the meaning of the verses that are read. And I have very many cases of non-Muslims who have embraced Islam through listening to the Quran being recited. It has got its own influence, its own moral influence, more psychological influence of whoever would read it. I lived in the States for 1 year, and I was a visiting professor at the UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. I spent a sabbatical leave there for 1 year, and I received a young lady who was in the Himalayas mountaineering, and she told me that she arrived late to the place she was visiting, and late at night she heard the adhan. She didn't know. She said, I heard a noise. So she said, I dressed, went down. I found a small place with lightning in it. I tried to go in, said they didn't allow me. And they told me this is a place of worship, you are not allowed to go in. And she said, I stood out listening to the Quran being recited. She said, I felt a thrill in my body, in my heart, in my mind, although I could not understand what they were saying. And she came to ask about Islam, and she embraced Islam simply by listening to the adhan being given and the Quran being recited. And we call this the great influence of the Quran being recited or being listened to. The influential effect of the Quran on people who listen to it, even without understanding the meaning of the verses being read. The facet number 16 in these facets that can testify to the divine nature of the glorious Quran is the precise preservation of the glorious Quran for more than 14 centuries in exactly the same language of revelation, without a single letter being added to it or removed from it. And this preservation has been actually proved by many of the mathematical precision or mathematical control of the letters and words and verses in the glorious Qur'an. So we call this the preservation aspect. And number 17, we have the way in which the Qur'an is written. We call it the graphical precision of the glorious Qur'an. The way the words of the Qur'an have been written is a special way that can accommodate all the dialects of the Arabs and can express the numerous meanings of the verse. Because the Quran, one of its uniqueness is that the verse can come in a few words, or actually a few letters, and these few words can maintain many ideas that all integrate without the slightest discrimination. And this is one of the greatest aspects of the glorious Quran, which we call it the graphical precision of the glorious Quran. Number 18, we have the challenge of the glorious Quran to the humans and the jinn, individually or together, to produce a book like the Quran, or 10 chapters like it, or even a single chapter like it. And this challenge has been standing for more than 14 centuries without a single sane person coming forward to say, yes, I could write a book or a chapter or 10 chapters similar to the glorious Quran. Not only in the style, but in the content as well. The language, the content, and the purity of the message. So we call this challenging power of the glorious Quran. Then we have what we call the precision of the message. The precision of the message of the glorious Quran. Because all the way through, the message is inviting for producing the good human being, the pious human being, the man who can understand his message in life. And then we have إعجاز الكمال المطلق, the perfection of the Quran, because a book like the Quran addressing many topics without a single mistake. These are facets, and many others can clearly testify to any sane person that the Quran cannot be the work of man. It is the divine word in its divine purity, preserved by the will of Allah. And until we meet in another episode, I greet you in our Islamic way. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah's peace, mercy, and blessings be with you all.